Hello and welcome to the Fat Boss Guide to Tortoise 10-man heroic in the Throne of Thunder.
Hello.
And this encounter hasn't changed too much compared to normal. It's still a good encounter though, and they have added a few new abilities that make it quite challenging.
Yeah, they've had
And there's quite a big learning curve on it, but it's a good fight.
It's good. Now, if you haven't seen our normal mode guide to this fight, then please do check it out, because we're not going to be covering all the normal mode mechanics and whatnot. So if you don't know what certain things do and you need to get your memory refreshed, then do click up on the annotation, and that'll save everyone some time.
Now for this encounter you want 1 or 2 tanks. We recommend that you do 2 tank it. 1 tanking it's a bit of a pain in the arse and it's sort of a bit high risk. But you can be done, and we'll talk about that in a moment. You want to bring 2 healers and mixed DPS. However, bring in DPS that do have reliable single target or AoE slows is really, really useful.
Now, the main thing that you do need these reliable slows is because of turtles. Now, of course, these turtles do spawn still, and it is incredibly important that they are slow, because they're going to be running around. They're already a high amount of damage in this fight, and of course, if people need to move and the healers are trying to heal, it's going to be a massive pain. So things like getting a Chillblains on all of them through like a Howling Blast, or the Warlock slow is it's a really, really good one, a 70% slow on all targets that can be done by Affliction Locks. That's really, really useful for this. So what we did is that we set a certain amount of DPS on these turtles, because of course you have the bats as well, and we'll talk about the bats in a second. But so what we did is that we would slow all the turtles, single target 1 turtle down during that AoE slow, and then assign 2 of these people that are dealing with the turtles to individually slow the ones after the stack has dropped. What we just got, we just got a Frost Death Knight to constantly slow them the whole time, because he wasn't doing anything else. He was kind of bitch slowing. So that's one way of doing it. It's probably better that you don't do it that way, but we'll kind of roster fucked for this kill. So it's even doable with a bad roster, which is fine. So just make sure these turtles are constantly slowed and that you do get them down very, very quickly. And of course you do kick them at the boss during the Furious Stone Breath. We also kicked the turtles when the other turtles were spawning, so that those turtles would get hit by that turtle. There's a lot of turtles, it's very confusing, but it just makes it so those turtles will have a 20% damage taken increase, which means that they'll just die a lot quicker. Just make sure that you don't use too many of the turtles, because otherwise if a breath comes in and you don't have any left, that's bad.
And the breath works exactly the same as it does on normal. It will just more or less one hit you. Just make sure that it is interrupted.
Also, make sure that you don't assign 1 person to interrupt. It should really, well, we got like 2 or 3 people to, like, it is their responsibility as a group to communicate and do that job, because you can be in the wrong place sometimes, and sometimes you might be focusing on something else and you'd mess it up, or you might be knocked up and you can't do it because more turtles have spawned and stuff like that. So it generally is better if you have more than 1 person talking to each other about kicking the turtles.
Now the boss will still do his snapping bite, and on heroic it does hit a lot harder. So as a tank, if you are tanking the boss, you want to make sure that you do have some form of damage reduction, or like an absorb shield in whatever sense, or you're staggering it, because it does hurt. And if you don't have anything up, it's going to do a lot of fucking damage, and I'll understand even more so when we start talking about the absorb shield in a second.
Now the rock falls are still in play. They're nothing really different. They fall at the same speed and everything. They just hurt a lot more.
Yeah, they do a lot more damage.
Let's just say if you are still in it on normal mode, you might be able to get away with it. On heroic, you're not going to be able to get away with it really, unless you have a huge shield, but that would just be a huge waste of it. Just never get hit by these. Of course, they still do their 20-yard hit everyone thing, which is kind of pointless moving from it, because it's quite negligible damage anyway. But if you're ridiculously high movement class and there's nothing else to do, then you might want to try and move from it, but otherwise don't really worry about that.
Now the bats are still here on heroic, and they're more or less the same. However, their Drain the Weak ability, rather than them doing it on you when you're under 350k health like normal mode, they'll do it when you're under 550k health, which for the majority of tanks, like especially if you've just got to this fight and you haven't really done many other fights on heroic, you're probably not going to have the gear to have like that much more than, say, 650k health. You're not going to have that much health as a tank at this point. So the Drain the Weak ability will be used on you as soon as you do drop below that 550k threshold. And obviously when the Drain the Weak happens, the bats also do more damage. So make sure you're above that 550k threshold, and you'll understand how to do that even better in a minute.
Now with the DPS to do with the bats, what we personally did is that we did kind of separate our DPS into 2 groups. One set for the turtles, which has a lot of slowers and quite good single target DPS, and then another group for DPS in these bats. We literally just had 2 people on it. We had 1 rogue, and we also had a elemental chamois. They were able to solo it. They could kill the bats before like new bats spawned and everything like that, which was absolutely perfect for us. and because of course your tank is going to be taking quite a lot of damage generally, they're going to be doing a lot of damage to it as well. So you don't really need to throw loads and loads of people on these bats, and because of the turtles coming in, you can't really send too many people on the bats because obviously the turtles won't die. So it is really a fine balancing act between killing the bats and killing the turtles, but of course the turtles and the bats are the most important things to kill. The boss is, well, of course you want to kill the boss, but it is the lowest priority.
Yeah, he'll just get cleaved down and you can do damage to him when there's small breaks.
Yeah.
But generally bats and turtles.
So yeah, just make it 2 groups and you shouldn't have too much issue.
Now the Quake Stomp is like one of the biggest changes on the fight. It still does the exact same thing. It will stun you and do some damage, except rather than doing 65% of your maximum health, it will do 100% of your maximum health. So if you don't have any damage reduction on yourself and you don't have any absorb shield or anything like that, you will just get one hit, flat out one hit. So when every Quake Stomp does come in, you want to be using your personal cooldowns, and it comes in every 60 seconds, so you want to keep that in mind. And really you want to work out your cooldown rotations from your healers just to heal everyone up. However, there is one new ability that's been added, and we've mentioned a couple of times. You can actually give yourself an absorb shield.
Now around the outside of the room there are 5 of these crystals, and now when you hit these crystals you'll get a debuff that is an absorb shield for 15% of your maximum health. Now every time you're healed from this point where you have this debuff on you, it will feed the debuff. Even if you're on 1% health and you have this debuff, it will heal the debuff constantly, and you cannot get healed until this debuff is gone because you've taken the damage equal to the shield. And this cap out at 75% once you've received healing equal to 75% of your maximum health. So it's just very important that you do know that if you take it at a low percentage of health, you'll stay at a low percentage of health. And this is really bad. If you take it at a low percentage of health, I know, say you're on 10% or something, and a Quake Stomp comes in, even if you have a full shield, that's 75% of that shield will pretty much go on a Quake Stomp most of the time, and you'll still take damage from all the rockfall when you're on really low health. So it's an incredibly bad idea. Throughout the fight, you should really be taking this crystal shell whenever you are really above 90%. It's kind of a bad idea to take it 100%. Well, it's not a bad idea, but if you have a druid healer who's trying to do wild growths and everything like that, because of the smart heal, it will recognize you at 100% health and won't even bother spreading properly. And with other people that's the case as well, like with her smart heal. So you want to try and do it probably about 90 to 95% health. Just make sure you don't do it any lower than really 85, because otherwise it's just going to be a massive pain, because if the shield does go, it's just going to be messy.
Yeah, you can start getting in sort of towards not necessarily one hit territory, but you know, if you are on say 80% health and you take the shield and the Quake Stomp comes in and you don't have any other shields or any other DRs, the shell will go instantly and you'll be on about 50% health, and then you have to deal with all the rockfall damage. And the idea is that when all the rockfall damage is coming in, you quickly heal everyone up like as quick as you possibly can while healing the tanks as well, and we'll talk about the tanks in a second. You need to keep like healing up the raid, and then as soon as the rockfall damage has stopped, you immediately go and get a new crystal shell.
Assuming that you're high enough anyway, yeah.
And that's more or less how you do it as a DPS and a healer. Just make sure you're using it at the right time. Try and use a damage reduction when the Quake Stomp comes in, just to minimise the amount of damage you initially take from that. Eat all the rockfall damage. There's nothing you can do about that. Just heal up. And then as soon as you are on a decent amount of health, reapply the shell. Now, as a tank, applying the shell is kind of, I wouldn't say hard, but it's a bit weird. Just because of the nature of how erratic boss damage can be. Now, when you're tanking the boss, obviously the main thing that's going to break the shell or will stop you from picking up the shell initially is Snapping Bite. So you want to wait until the boss has finished a Snapping Bite, and then between a melee hit, you want to try and like just say to your healers, just quickly spam heal me for like 2-3 seconds, just let me get topped. And then between a boss melee hit, then hit the crystal, and then that will be fine. And essentially as a tank, if you do everything correctly, your shell will never ever drop, providing your healers are doing their job properly, because for every single Snapping Bite, providing you use some form of absorb or like keeping like Shield of Your Righteous or having a blood shield for it or staggering properly or whatever, using whatever you can, the Snapping Bite will never ever break the crystal shell, providing it's maxed out. And the Quake Stomp, you really should have a cooldown available for every single one of those as well, which means after the Quake Stomp, your shell should still not be broken. And it's the same for the tank that's on the bats. If you use cooldowns on the Quake Stomps, you should be fine. But it's very, very important that the healers always prioritise the tank that's on the bats before you prioritise the tank that's on the boss. because if a tank that's on the bat and their shell drops, the chances are they're going to get a drain weak very, very soon. That shell has to remain on the bat tank. So important. And if it does drop, then you should call out for things like stuns, or you should use your own stuns, and you can actually kite the bats. There is actually kills where people have literally used a monk tank and just kited the bats the whole fight. So there's probably like 150 bats up at the end, but it doesn't matter because you can just spam kite them. They can be slowed, they can be stunned. Obviously don't route them near people and stuff like that because people might get globaled, but essentially there's multiple ways of doing it, and this brings us towards the one tank thing that we mentioned at the start. Now, we did actually one tank our first kill, but we really don't recommend it. We did it with a paladin, and I don't think it's actually possible. I mean, it probably is possible using other tanks, but paladins definitely feel like the strongest for this. Now, the way to one tank it as a paladin is that obviously when you have the snapping bite coming in, it's like vital that you have your Shield of Righteous up. If you don't have the Shield of Righteous up just for that brief moment, and this comes in like every 6 seconds, which gives you more than enough time to build enough holy power to actually get another Shield of Righteous off, providing your haste stacked as well. If you don't have the shield up for that point, it's likely that your shield's going to break, and obviously if you have bats on you as well, the bats will just instantly gib you and you'll just die instantly. Now, there are moments where you are one tanking where you are going to have like bats on you and the boss and a Quake Stomp, and yeah, you need to use your really big cooldowns for that because you'll just get absolutely butchered. Now, if your shell does drop while you are one tanking, which it's quite likely that it will, you should like kite immediately, just stray from left to right, left to right, left to right, from in front of the boss, because obviously you can't leave the boss's melee range because, yeah, the boss will go stupidly crazy and start killing people. This means that the bats won't be hitting you, and it just makes it a lot easier. Now, in terms of picking up the bats, it's quite difficult because obviously you're kind of forced to be stuck in melee range, which means you can't just run over to the bats and do some damage to them. Using Glyph of Battle Mender, which you'll probably be using anyway, that will obviously give you a lot of threat because you'll be healing random people in the raid. However, this, the majority of the time, isn't enough, especially if you have like a really high HPS person such as Resto Druid. I mean, Resto Druids are really strong on this fight. The majority of the time, they'll just run over to healers. So at this point, you're kind of relying on other players such as rogues for their tricks or hunters for their MDs. Hunters being better because obviously the bats are in the air, the rogues won't be able to reach them initially. However, you can use Holy Prism, which isn't really used by Paladin tanks. Generally, it's not that good compared to the Hammer. But you can use the Holy Prism, and as soon as the bats do come down, use a Prism. That'll heal a load of random people, which will give you even more threat on the bats. And also, when the bats do come near you, you could probably use it again before the next bats come in, which is even more damage or healing, however you decide to use it. So that's another way of doing it. But like we say, we really don't recommend that you use one tank. It is very sketchy. It is quite easy to make mistakes. Bats trying to hit you in the back all the time and stuff like that. It's just not fun at all, but it can be done. And if your Paladin tank is confident, then try it.
Now, when the boss does hit 20% health, he'll go a bit crazy and he'll just send out loads and loads of turtles. He'll do his Call of the Turtle thing about every 11 seconds or so he really does start spamming it. What we did is that we waited for another Call of the Turtles to come in, about 25% health, killed those turtles very quickly, and then just nuked the boss. Flat out at this point, just completely ignore everything else and absolutely nuke him. We personally didn't save Bloodlust for this point, but because we used it at the beginning of the fight because we thought it'd be an extra DPS increase, but you can save it to the end of the fight. It doesn't really matter too much, I suppose, but really at this point you just want to be slowing every set of turtles that do come through. Using things like Chillblains is probably better because you can slow every 11 seconds if you just save a Howling Blast for it. Is really useful. So do try and do stuff like that, and really just nuke the boss before he kills you. It gets a bit mad at this point.
Yeah, it just becomes really hectic. I mean, especially if you're using one tank at this point, because you're going to have bats, like multiple waves of bats on one tank, plus all the turtles fucking everywhere. It's just a complete nightmare. At this point, you just want to use as many slows as possible on everything, just so it can, like, the turtles aren't just going absolutely mental, and just ignore everything and nuke the boss and just hope that you kill him before he kills you.
Yeah, we had like a 0.1% wipe once at this point, so yeah, it is very clutch. You want to do everything you can just to stay alive and kill the boss as soon as possible using double pots and stuff like that. So otherwise, if you can, really just sort out, it's really just sorting out the slows on the turtles, making sure that you do split your DPS properly, using the crystal effectively is very, very important, because if you mess up the crystal, you don't really know how you're using the crystal, you're going to have a massive amount of problems on this fight. And of course, getting your tanks to sort out, or tank to sort out who's going to be tanking what. And yeah, it is a lot of hit and miss and trial and error. You just got to kind of keep slamming your face into it and things will click, really. So, and the corpse run is nothing anyway, so it doesn't even matter.
So this guide did help out. Please do drop us a like, it helps us out quite a lot, and we'll see you for our next guide.
Thank you all.
Thanks for watching.